I'm getting real sick of these injuries this year. Fantasy football gods, it's not fun to be smited every single week with some massive, massive injuries. But at least with all those injuries, it still makes this video at least somewhat entertaining, somewhat helpful, because we always constantly have waiver wire players to pick up. This was not an issue that we had last year with all these injuries. I was struggling to get waiver wire pickups last year, but this year they are making it very, very easy on me, which honestly sucks, because then that means that a lot of our best players are no longer out. So I'm sick of it. I'm very sick of it. And I do not like that this video has like 10 plus guys that we need to be adding every single week. But here we are. Week 6 is in the books, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that can add value to the back end of your rosters. And first and foremost, I want to highlight a couple of players that are already highly rostered, but not exactly 100% that I think need to be. And that includes Jarquez Hunter, running back for the LA Rams, Isaiah Davis, running back for the New York Jets, Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, Oronde Gadsden, tight end for the LA Chargers, and Michael Mayer, tight end for the Vegas Raiders. Again, all these guys are rostered in well over 90% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right. We got a lot of clarity on the Chargers backfield without Omari and Hampton this week, as Kamani Vidal was by far the better running back and the leader of the backfield with 18 carries for 124 yards, plus 3 catches for 14 yards and a receiving touchdown. Compare that to Haskins' 7 total touches, and we can see that there is a clear favorite for LA with Omari and Hampton out. So obviously, if Vidal is still available in your league, I would drop pretty much your entire fab to go get him, especially with the news that Hampton is expected to be out much longer than the 4-week return window for the short-term IR. But it's also because of that news that I would still be looking to add Haskins as well, because if anything were to happen to Vidal over the next few weeks, we could have some games where Haskins is the lead back for this LA Chargers backfield. The other backfield of note right now is, of course, Arizona, especially with the Sunday morning report that Bam Knight would be elevated over Michael Carter as the lead back this week. Well, I guess that was partially true, as Knight did lead the backfield in touches with 12 for 54 yards, and he did get a goal line touchdown. But Michael Carter was right behind him with 11 touches for 64 yards. So I really have no idea what is going on with this backfield. The one thing to note, though, is that Amari DiMarcado left the game with an ankle injury. So I guess if he is out for a couple of weeks here, I guess by removing one player from this backfield, we could have more confidence in starting one of the other two. I can't really say I really trust either one of them right now, given the 50-50 split that we've seen this past week. But with all the injuries and bye weeks that we have right now, you may not have a choice in starting either one. So if Knight or Carter are still available, you absolutely need to be adding both, because we have at least 2 more weeks of this shared backfield before Trey Benson is even eligible to return from IR, with the possibility of maybe up to 4 weeks, depending on Benson's recovery timeline, that he is still out, and more weeks that we get this dumb split between Carter and Bam Knight. Sticking with the Arizona Cardinals, though, Marvin Harrison Jr. also left the game with a concussion, which, all things considered, with injuries this week, that's probably the most minor thing that happened on Sunday. But with the way that the concussion protocol works now, it is very hard for players to clear the protocol in enough time to play the next week's game, so we could be without Marvin Harrison Jr. for Week 7. So if Marvin Harrison is out, that would make Zay Jones and Greg Dortch very interesting options in a pinch, as Jones would take the outside role for Marvin Harrison Jr. across from Michael Wilson, which he did catch 5 passes for 79 yards on 8 targets in that role this week. Dortch then could also benefit by a potential increase in targets, and he had a touchdown after Marvin Harrison left on Sunday. Of the two, I am more interested in Zay Jones as both the most available player on waivers right now and the higher upside for fantasy given his more perimeter role versus Greg Dortch's really slot-only role. He's also not really a bad receiver. We've seen him have fantasy-relevant stretches over the course of his career on multiple teams. So if you do need a guy next week, Zay Jones or Greg Dortch could be that guy for you off of waivers. Now, on to the big injuries this week, starting in Tampa Bay with Emeka Egbuka leaving early with a hamstring injury. I absolutely despise hamstring injuries because they almost always mean a multi-week absence. Example A being Emeka Egbuka's teammate Mike Evans, who's been out multiple weeks now because of a hamstring issue. So if Emeka Egbuka is out a while, and Mike Evans is still out, Chris Godwin is also still out, and Jalen McMillan is still injured from his preseason injury, This Buccaneers wide receiver room is dwindling quickly. We've already highlighted Sterling Shepard as a pickup this year, and he's here once again as the most experienced receiver on the team if all the other guys are out. He did catch 2 passes for 51 yards this week, and he could operate as the safest option for fantasy with a PPR floor, but albeit a kind of limited ceiling. Then we have rookie Tez Johnson, who also enters the conversation as their day 3 pick from Oregon. He is a small speedster who did catch 4 passes for 59 yards in week 5, and then also caught a 45-yard touchdown this week, but that was his only catch on 3 targets. He's an upside option, but with a very low floor if you need that kind of a player for fantasy football. And then there's some dude named Cameron Johnson, that's Cameron with a K, who apparently is a second-year player, not much bigger than Tez Johnson, out of Barton College. He actually had 4 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown this week as the leading receiver in yards and second on the team in targets behind Cade Otton. I honestly have no idea who this person is, but he is in here now because of this production without Ibuka this week, so do with that as you will. The Buccaneers do get a road Monday night matchup against the Detroit Lions next week, who currently have pretty much 0 healthy starters in their secondary right now. So if their defense is still weak next week and Baker has to throw more to match the Lions offense, you would think someone from this receiving room could step up for fantasy football. Now, who that person actually is, I really don't know. I would maybe bet on Sterling Shepard for the experience and the floor, but the other two could be interesting Hail Mary plays if you really need that to kind of catch up in your matchup. Next on the big injuries this week was an ankle injury to Puka Nacua, because we can't ever have nice things for fantasy football. Sean McVay has already come out and said that he's unsure if Puka is going to be able to play in London next week, so he's out, along with Tutu Atwell's hamstring injury. We could see an increased role for 2024 preseason darling Jordan Whittington, as well as tight end Tyler Higbee. Now, Higbee actually led the Rams in yards this week with 40 and caught a touchdown on 4 targets. Whittington also saw 4 targets, but he only had 3 receptions for 23 yards. I will say the Rams didn't need to throw a ton this week because they really didn't need to against the Ravens, so I'm not worried about the low target numbers or lack of production overall this week. I'm just trying to find potential for next week. Higbee could honestly be a very sneaky play for anyone needing a tight end, and then Whittington kind of becomes a desperation option similar to every other receiver that I've named so far. So if you need either one of those two guys and they're available, they're not bad ads on waivers this week. Next up then is Garrett Wilson's injury that he seemed to have been dealing with for most of the 4th quarter in London this week. The Jets already don't have anyone other than Garrett Wilson to throw to, so you may not even want to add anyone if Garrett Wilson is out, but if you do, it's probably Josh Reynolds, who is the only player other than Wilson to see more than a single target in this week's game against the Broncos. And get this, he led the Jets in receiving yards with 25. Yep, 25 yards on 3 catches to lead the team. That's pretty much all I need to say about the Justin Fields experience for his receivers. So buyer beware here if you're looking to add and then play Josh Reynolds if Garrett Wilson is out. But with all the injuries happening right now, I really can't blame you either. Finally, Calvin Ridley also left the game early, also with a hamstring injury. Now, similar to the New York Jets, the Titans also really have no one else to throw to behind Calvin Ridley other than the occasional Alec Iomanor target. And similar to the New York Jets again, I just don't think you really want to play anyone catching passes from Cam Ward in this offense right now. It's just not a good team that barely has any production. But again, if you need to, maybe you go for Van Jefferson, who caught 4 passes for 75 yards this week with Ridley gone on a team-high 6 targets. It's not pretty, but hey, maybe you do need him. Maybe you're in a very deep league and you need an extra guy because of all these bye weeks and injuries. Maybe that guy just happens to be Van Jefferson. But enough of the injuries and miserable waiver options. Let us end on a high note. Little Jordan Humphrey is the new perimeter receiver for Jackson Dart, otherwise known as him. The Giants team is now very fun, and if Dart is truly going to be a thing this year, and with Malik Neighbors out for the entirety of the season, then sure, I want to root for little Jordan Humphrey to be a thing. He led the Giants with 8 targets this week, hauling in 4 for 55 yards, and also just missing on an end zone target for a touchdown just before halftime. He is rostered in 2% of the NFL leagues that I am pulling data from, so everyone should have at least one waiver wire claim this week, and I truly hope that little Jordan Humphrey turns into something this year as essentially Jackson Dart's wide receiver 1 on the outside.